Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well, I am very happy to welcome our guest, Bill. Bill Phlorgian is a pseudonym, but I've been wanting to talk about the subject of trans, and Bill's done some really authentic writing on the subject on Facebook. Not a fan of modern woke self censorship and censorship. So I thought would be a good person to, just have a conversation about the subject. So thank you for joining us today, Bill.
You're welcome.
And, tell us a little about your origin story, when you first transitioned, where you're at now, and even where in all this you became an Ayn Rand fan.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I born still am XY male, but and I was a classic trans case, childhood onset, earliest memories, all that. It got worse with, puberty instead of getting, easier. But at the same time, it turned out I also had some hormonal issues. And part of it's genetic, part of it's structural, messing with my hypothalamus pituitary area, which monitors and controls our hormonal balances. So, genetic issue is a little bit of aromatase overproduction. And, so the two together kind of made life kind of weird at the edges. But it also, by the way, with that structural problem came epilepsy, and which is going to be important. And it turned out that the epilepsy was estrogen sensitive, always has been. And with aromatase, it's a thing which converts testosterone to estrogen in everyone. Women produce a lot more of it, because they're producing testosterone in the very beginning. But that aromatase is out into estrogen quite efficiently, from the gonads. And where men don't produce so much. I produce somewhere a little bit too much, for a guy anyway. But I always had this, always had the gender dysphoria and everything's just always been there. And by 25, I just had enough of gender dysphoria and just oddities and, let's say, disappointments with body and that kind of thing. But and I transitioned.
This is the 80s.
This is the 80s, yes. So this was, a long time ago, and back in the, before God invented color, whatever. And back in the old days. And so, and I lived, my adult life as a woman, and everything was good, really. It was a good decision. But then in 2016, 2017, things started getting weird neurologically and turned out endocrinologically. That structural problem was changing in some way. And, it's a very sensitive area of the brain. All you need is something to go 2 neurons to the left and everything changes, right? So I woke up in a hospital one day after 3 grand mal seizures, which tried to stop my heart, and, that's bad, right? And I was left blind for, let's say, functionally blind for a year afterwards. I couldn't use my eyes without getting seizures. It was really, it was intense, And just as I'm getting over the whole eye thing and seeing, and I can drive again, and okay, then my hormones start going nuts, and like, what the heck? My head's getting played with, and it for a while, and I was starting to suspect the estrogen connection at that point. And we really didn't know too much about what was going on with me. So I went off of estrogen for a year, and I was great. No seizures. I could drink coffee with breakfast with them. I was off of my anti-seizure medication. My neurologist wasn't happy, but it's like, no, dude, I think I know what's going on. I'm going to prove it. And so in the meantime, my endocrinologist is giving me this sort of ticking time bomb kind of thing. So listen, without sexual steroids, you're on, a fast track for osteoporosis and heart disease and other things like that. So, you gotta be on estrogen or testosterone, I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm thinking, I was wrestling with this for a couple of years and for a number of other reasons. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe the gig's up, and I just got to do this for the sake of my, health. It's quirky, the actual details are quirky. It's like, well, fine, that's how it's got to be. But what I'm struggling with that a lot. It's I was only on testosterone for 9 weeks, and boy, what an experience. Just really never had that level of testosterone before, as but and it was just, and that's like old guy level testosterone, and I just couldn't do it. I don't know if I can do the whole detransition thing. So that's that story, with lots of details I'm omitting, and as you know, Scott. But Ayn Rand, this was, I was working in Boston in the financial technology sector, and I don't know, and turned out there's a lot of Ayn Rand fans. They're doing financial technology stuff.
Right.
Everybody dealing
Financial.
stock trading, and I was more aligned with quantitative analysts and that kind of thing. I have a undergrad degree in physics, and I was studying some other things. I was looking at grad school work, and I was actually thinking of doing the quant thing. I started taking some classes at Harvard, and it's like 9/11 got in the way of that. But and I was just talking to somebody about, I don't even remember what, and he goes, "You should read The Fountainhead. Have you ever read The Fountainhead?" I go, "No." "You have to read The Fountainhead." Okay, solid recommendation, and I'm glad I did. Of course, then I had to I got to read everything now from Ayn Rand, and that was the late '90s. So, it's been, and then what happened, of course, for all of us, Facebook happened, and I was living in Seattle at the time. And there's some people in Seattle that I connect with, and of course on Facebook, you start, everybody, all of us were connecting. What is it, like 2009, 2010, when so many of us were just forming the sort of OS network on Facebook, and I just got connected, and so much of us been friends ever since. So that's how I got there. But I was drawn to the philosophy because I've always just been very not just data focused, but focused on the reality of things. What does it mean to create a life based on focusing on reality? And of course, when you're trans, and there's certain people like, well, you're not focusing on reality. Have I got a story to tell you? But but because of this problem, and navigating this problem throughout my life, and of course, it's two problems, right? There's the hormonal issue, plus this thing which I could never get rid of. How to navigate life, a reality-based life, how to put up with yourself, how to make good, rational decisions, what is moral, what is not, and religion wasn't getting me anywhere. And although people were kind and doing very well, it just wasn't getting me anywhere. But just navigating the sea of difficulty, I had to be very focused on reality myself, knowing myself, understanding where I fail cognitively, where everybody else fails cognitively, how to think clearly. Of course, now we're getting epistemology, all this other good stuff. And this has just been so important for my survival. And of course, you get into Ayn Rand, and this is precisely it, right? Logic, reason, important for a human's survival. Maybe not a crow, but humans in particular. We have this capacity. We do these things. We put ourselves, we use our logic and reason to, I don't know, maybe put ourselves on limbs, if you want, and we better use logic and reason to keep ourselves from falling off those limbs. For instance, we use logic and reason to create nuclear weapons, but we better, if we're going to do that, we better use logic and reason to not blow ourselves up as a species. So humans occupy a very unique place when it comes to logic and reason. You better know how to wield that
Absolutely, as well as just figuring out our own situation and getting past the next thing.
Yeah.
That's great. You asked on one of your posts for the opinions of objectivists about the possibility of you detransitioning and I think some people were asking why you care what other people think, and your response was, I care because I want to know. For all my life, people have walked on eggshells. It seems, about this issue. And I want to hear what people are thinking because it makes me feel like a more respectable human being than some mysterious object. And that's what I think, people want to be just treated normally. And sometimes everyone goes out of their way to virtue signal to be like, oh, this trans person can't be wrong about anything, or and but that's and I appreciate that raw honesty. You just want to be treated like a regular person, like anyone else.
You know, in this weird world of, everybody's trans now. It turns out that most trans people are normal and quiet. This is the thing which most people don't understand. When you hear of trans people these days, these people, they're usually the loudest people in the room. And as we know, even in OS circles, um, the loudest, most insane, craziest person in the room sucks all the oxygen out of the air every time they walk in. And the only person being heard is, the drunk guy in the corner, right? And it is the same thing with trans people. Most trans people, they're blended, they just want to blend into the woodwork. It's like, I just want a normal life. They go, you go through this whole thing. Really, you just want a freaking normal life. And, for me, for 30 years, I still have a normal life, I guess. But, just a nice, normal life. No one knew. And no one was going to know. I was like, that's fine. And again, went to work and, got married and did all that stuff. And and they're quiet. And behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of us going, my God, they're insane these days. What the heck? Are you going to say something? Speak for us normal people. I'm not going to out myself. Are you going to say something? No, I'm not going to out myself. So you have, most people, the last thing they want to do is out themselves or do anything crazy or stupid. And in the meantime, the only people talking are, the people who should, speak for themselves and not speak for, all trans people. And so it goes, and it's no different than any other sort of, group infighting. And as we know, in, objectivist circles, we've seen, very similar stuff, right? For different reasons, but, it's like, why? They make all of this, Rand fans like look bad. Well,
It's absolutely true.
not,
It's like, yeah, I mean, and objectivism holds that there don't need to be conflicts among rational people. So
yeah.
you want them to be a little bit better. Um,
Well, can I jump in?
sure.
So, Bill, one of the other questions you asked, I believe it was on Facebook or somewhere on social media, was when you're presenting as a woman, should you call yourself a man or a woman?
Mm.
And my opinion is that it's really up to you, it's your life. But I focus on the phrase presenting as a woman because
Yeah.
in that question, you're sort of admitting that you're pretending to be a woman. It's like a woman. So I think you really want to present as a man. I think that's what you really want to do because it's more comfortable. But
Well, I was trying for a while, and I'm having a really difficult time with that lately. But keep going. We can go.
so I think really what needs to be addressed here, I think, is the terminology that's going on. Is like, you hear of transition, but what is really happening? Like, are you really transitioning from one thing to another? Because I don't think you are. I don't think you're going from a man to a woman. I think you're going from presenting as a man to presenting as a woman.
Which
And
is a big deal, this
but
idea.
if you want to follow objectivity as a principle, I think
Hmm.
at least in your own mind, you need to be honest with yourself and say, I
Yep.
am a man, even if you're presenting as a woman. And if it becomes an issue with your relationships, then I guess you have to figure out, are you going to be honest with that person or not?
Oh yeah. I mean, so honest, rational trans people, behind the scenes who talk among themselves, of course, not outing themselves. You know, all these things are discussed. This is all. And I've run support groups in the past. I've attended them, lived in different places, and it sort of help other people through it. And these are things we talk about. By just so you know, that this is there is plenty of rational discussion amongst people who are in this situation. But yes, I mean, you know, trans people are very aware of their birth sex, their objective condition, which is why they're having some distress, a great deal of distress. And the question always is, how do you what's your modus vivendi for life? How do you navigate around this condition? How do you best sort of fit in and adjust and just deal? It's I sometimes I call it a disability, just because I'm using it, I don't know, maybe more metaphorically, um, so that when you have a disability and you're let's say you're blind, and you need to figure out how you're going to continue living your life, with the condition, and how do you literally navigate around the world, and do whatever you're going to do, and not let this stop you. It's the same kind of thing, and there's compromises, like compromise after compromise after compromise. So, but the problem does come in with the terminology. It's always been difficult. Things are always difficult to explain. Unless you just sit down, you get to know someone, you can talk for hours about the subtleties of this, that, and the other thing, which I'm sure you're just dying to do, which we can do here. And but
Well, let me jump on that and talk about the term gender, because
mm,
in my view, it's not like an actual term that refers to anything in reality, unless you're using it as a synonym for sex, like your male or femaleness. I think gender is actually a linguistic concept that's been misapplied to psychology, and it's sort of trying to replace femininity or masculinity, those sex-based personality traits. But it doesn't work because you're in mentally, you're not a male or female. You're just a person. In your body, you are a male or female because you produce eggs or you produce sperm or you
yeah,
have XY or you have XX chromosomes. Um, so I think gender as a concept is false, and it's more of a myth, and it's causing a lot of confusion in this debate. People think that it means something and nobody can, agree on what it means. So that's why you get these ideas like you're transitioning from a male to female when really you're just presenting as one or the other.
yeah. So you're right. I'm going to challenge it a little bit with something that many of us have been trying to put our fingers on. Part of the problem is that there's something going on that's hard to describe. There seems to be a cognitive problem of self-awareness, and it's kind of like a gestalt. Call it a gestalt. Gender gestalt might be a more precise term. And in gestalt, if you're familiar with the idea, usually it's illustrated with optical illusions. You know, especially where you can see it in one or two states. You either see the wine, it's visual ones, uh,
Right.
uh, see the wine glass, or you see the young couple kissing. And in a gestalt situation, it you can see one or the other. Unless you have something broken, you can't see both. You can flip between the two, and there does seem to be this problem with sort of a gender gestalt that we can have. Uh, and like, I remember this one woman that I met. She would have, during certain seizure-like conditions she would have, uh, she said, yeah, I would get intense gender dysphoria during the period I'm having a seizure. And it's just really weird. Like, I'm a man, and it's, and she goes, she learned to deal with it like a migraine. And it's like, oh, I'll go to sleep and whatever, and I'll be better in an hour. And she just suffers through it. And there's also weird things. Like, there's this woman in Germany, famous epilepsy case study, where when she would have seizures, she would see everybody, and it's all illusion. She would see everybody as a man, with beards and receding hairlines, everybody, men, herself. And she knew it was just part of the seizure. And there's a particular part of the brain in this case, which is built, I mean, to recognize, not built, but it's, evolved to specifically recognize human faces, called the fusiform facial area. And that is subdivided to recognize human female faces, human male faces. And if you're having a seizure in that area, that could really mess with, how your brain is actually interpreting, seeing, perceiving, male and female attributes in a person. But there's other parts of the brain which further integrate, our sense of self and our environment, our sense of self as a whole body. And, and it could be, I suspect that there's a lot more of this sort of gendered parts of the brain, which it's just pure evolution. It's evolutionary baggage. Is what we do. And I think sometimes some people have some honest problems with it. Now, that aside, you would assume that would be a vanishingly small number of people in the world, and you would be right. Now what's happened is that gender is, as you said, for the most part, is become this useless word, and especially among the young. I mean, most of the noise you hear are, teens and, young 20 somethings on the internet. No one knows you're autistic 14-year-old, So, what is gender? And it's become this amorphous term. And then, of course, it becomes, anybody who wants to market a thing, who wants to be hip, anybody in Hollywood or whatever. And it just takes on a life of its own. And it becomes really a utterly meaningless word under most.
It's become so meaningless that you now have a proliferation of so-called genders, and there's like 30 or 40 of them now. And it's like, what's the point anymore? There's no point to the concept, unless we can agree on what it actually means. So,
I'm
but
trying to
you
figure
mentioned
out which of your comments is going to get this show pulled from YouTube.
probably all of them. But yeah, you mentioned the mental issues where you feel like you're in the wrong body or something like that. I think a lot of that is just a personalized thing. You have a history, you grew up a certain way, you have a certain biochemistry, and you just have to figure it out, right? And that's something that not everyone can do. I mean, not everyone's a scientist and can study their own body and their own personality and figure it out. So you need help, right? And so maybe it's a failure in psychology. The psychiatrists, they just don't know how to deal with it, or they can't figure it out. I don't know. What do you think is a solution to this psychological issue that arises when you feel like you're in the wrong body?
So first of all, when it comes to gender identity issues, there's any number of reasons people get themselves into this pickle. Any number of things. I mean, it could be autism, it could be sexual abuse when young, it could be fetish for some people, it could be you name it, it goes on. And it's fascinating, once I sort of went into detransition circles, then you really find out fascinating stuff, but there's any number of reasons why people end up with some kind of gender incongruity. And again, think of this as a gestalt, a way, sort of, like an optical illusion. And that's fine. And the brain works in these sort of phase shift kind of things in different contexts. It's just how it's, how it's constructed. But so knowing that there's many reasons, I hate to say reasons because it sort of brings up teleology, and I'm not a fan. But knowing that there's many factors that can go into one, bolstering somebody's gender, self-identity, and image, or it can go wrong. Any number of ways it can go wrong. The answer is going to be, it depends on the individual. And this is where, I just get back to just, objectivism over and over again. Really, it's about the individual. It's always about the individual. It should be about the individual. We should treat everybody as individuals, right? We should understand, if you're going to ask a question like that, especially with something complex, this is a complex issue, then you're going to have to understand the person at hand. So making general sweeping generalizations is not that helpful. There's some generalizations you can make about some groups of people somewhere, sometimes, but not everybody. And even in detransition circles where lies must stop, that's the sort of thing. It's like, this is not the place to be lying to yourself anymore. No more lies. And nobody feels like lying to themselves anymore. That's a very interesting place to be. Very healthy.
Another generalization to you. It seems to me that in most cases of this body dysmorphia, or whatever you want to call it, that it would be easier to change a person's mind about, being in the wrong body than it would be to change their actual body. I think so. There's two ways to deal with it, right? You can either try to convince them that they're actually in the proper body that they were born with, and they're just, a feminine man or a masculine woman. Or they can try to convince them that they're in the wrong body, and we need to change your body and shape it and mold it and give you different hormones and things like that. That seems like that body changing seems to be much more difficult than to actually persuade someone that there's not really anything wrong with them. They just are a feminine person or a masculine person in that sense.
And you are right. Most of the time. Most
I know,
people
realize it's hard to come to that realization sometimes because there's a lot of issues going on. But how shouldn't that be the orientation or the direction science goes in?
That used to be. This is one of the things that's driving a lot of us nuts right now. Is that, when I grew up and, I transitioned in the 80s. Now, part of my history was that, again, mine was childhood onset, and it was very, very obvious in my family that, okay, I had some problems with gender. And I was under distress. My mother had me in psychiatric care in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And this is the 70s. They didn't know too much. But, I remember this was a default position. It's like, you'll grow out of it. It turns out, by the way, most children who have some sort of, gender variant behaviors, identities, that kind of thing, most will turn out gay. Most will be now called desist. Left to themselves, most will desist. And what happens is that the clarity of puberty will change it. And so the answer for most people is, you're right. However, there's a few of us just, dang, it got worse with puberty. It's like, what the heck? Very curious. And again, we're talking vanishingly, what ought to be vanishingly small number of individuals. The question is why? And it's going to differ from individual to individual. But for the most part, you are right. Like, okay, I'm okay, and I've known, in my personal experience was that way too. People I've known, and it's like, well, they're gay, lesbians, whatever, and off we go, live a life. So and so is married and having a great life and just being, doing what they do, and and so it went. But
Maybe in some cases it's an issue of the hormones. So I think you said you had low testosterone.
yeah. So I had one gene overcodes for aromatase, which will convert testosterone to estrogen. So not only did I, were my testosterone levels a little bit lower, but my estrogen levels are higher. And this is genetic. It was affecting me prior to birth. And structural, where my hypothalamus, my endocrinologist like, yeah, you got a tumor up there, and non-cancerous, but something likely I was born with, a malformation in the hypothalamus pituitary area, which monitors and controls hormonal balances. So there was two strikes that I had, a little bit of, too much aromatase and, other hormonal balances. So, and how that was likely affecting me when I was young is that, the signaling mechanism you know, uh, for the gonads to produce testosterone was probably erratic or weak, erratic. Um, so, it was, I had difficulties and things got a little weird here and there. So yes, I had a two-pronged problem. When we look on my MRI, especially after the seizures, we're, taking MRIs of my brain. And one of the first things that my neurologist says, like, well, you've got mild cerebral atrophy. It's like, oh no, you don't want to hear this when you're 53. Oh, I'm going to die of early Alzheimer's. Oh, this is bad. No, hold on. There's no obvious sign of disease or injury, and it's global. It's your whole brain. It just didn't develop as much of it as it should have. We took multiple MRIs over 4 years, and nothing changed. Okay, you were born this way, and it's likely, it's consistent with hormonal misregulation in utero. Now, which hormone? It could be human growth hormone. It's hard to know, but if your hypothalamus isn't quite right, you're going to have hormonal control problems when you grow. So, my pituitary small and all this stuff. So, yeah, it's been, so I've had an extra complication. Did it affect, did it affect my, sexual orientation? Did it affect my, gender gestalt? If you study things like a certain gross intersex conditions, like complete androgen insensitivity is a very fascinating one, where an XY male will produce plenty of testosterone, but it does no good. The body is just insensitive to it. The receptor genes are broken. And so what'll happen is that these, morphologically, they're female. And they won't know that they have an XY gene until they fail to menstruate come puberty. You go get the sonogram, and it's like, you start getting the bad news. Take the genetic test. Oh, okay, well, golly. But their entire gestalt is gender gestalt is female, and they go on and get married, do whatever, and they're fine being female. And then there's XX women with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which produces too much testosterone. That's our secondary source of testosterone, is our adrenal glands, and their adrenal glands are just pumping testosterone, and the testosterone does not aromatase that or the adrenal glands do not aromatase that testosterone. So suddenly they've got testosterone in their body, and this is affecting us, while we're developing in utero. And whether you knew it or not, we actually go through two puberties. The first one is just before we're born, and in the first 3 months after we're born, and maybe as long as 6 months, where we're getting healthy doses of testosterone, and for females it's aromatasing into estrogen. And so why are newborns great? They're going through puberty. Poor kids. I mean, you can get hormone levels almost as high as your teenage years. So it's like,
Probably why they're always hungry.
yeah, right. And the little boys will be protein machines, and just like they will be again when they hit 13, and assuming you're healthy. So if you're having hormone trouble during, and you know, at that, this is, you know, there's so much that that it seems it's a very understudied, because it's difficult to study. And it's a very, that part of just prior to birth, after birth, your brain is forming a very important part of our development. And hormones, we know, we all went through, puberty when we were conscious in our teen years. That stuff is really powerful, right? It affects, not just your bodies, but your brains. It shapes your brain. Testosterone, estrogen shapes your brain in profound ways.
Sure, gets us going out at night.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's
along
it's
these,
going wrong when you're just born, when your brain is forming. It's a very critical period of time. So you study these cases, and the women with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, they're likely gay, they're very tomboyish, and and so on. So you can study these cases, and you go, well, look what happens with gender and sexual orientation in these cases, which have to do with hormonal issues rather than simple karyotype. um so I mean, it's fascinating to know. So the
well,
role that my hormonal problems played in my case, hard to know. I mean, this is just a really quirky thing, you know.
speaking of hormones later, and you did allude to this, you also posted that last summer you had some effects of testosterone, increased libido, which I can appreciate. Been stuck this way the whole time.
Oh
Um,
my.
but you didn't describe as pleasant, and
No,
by last fall, I think you had to switch to estrogen, which you also described as unpleasant.
no. Estrogen's fine with me. So here's what happened. So I finally, again, my endocrinologist has given me this, tick tock, and you can't be, off of, you can't be on nothing at all, uh, and and it's like, all right, I'll go on, again, debated it for a while, and I changed my name legally. I was getting ready. It's like, okay, gigs up, let me detransition, and for the sake of my health. So I go on testosterone. And again, it was at the sort of at the high level for, like, a man of an older man. And that was more testosterone than I've ever had in my life. And you can just tell, And it was just so unpleasant. And it turns out, by the way, that, for some men who start having hypogonadism later in life, and they consider HRT, hormonal replacement therapy. And some of them are like, I stopped. He goes, like this one guy's like, I'm not going to be, he said, I didn't feel like being, feeling like a 16-year-old boy at my age. This is too distracting. And so part of it was just that, being old is like, it's just nuts, and this has never been part of my experience personally. Uh, for me, having a sexual experience took work. I was that person that had to, I had to get to know someone. I had to, it didn't come like to me like it would for other boys. It was,
You said you felt like you didn't have normal T levels as a teen.
no, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah. While the other, I did learn through those years when I was in psychiatric care, group therapy with boys, you start learning to have relationships with boys without things getting too weird. So I did, by high school, I'm doing okay. And my friends would talk about, their reactions, and I'm not having the same kinds of reactions, but I learned the art of just shutting up and letting people assume that I had the same feelings, because I just didn't say anything to the contrary. So like,
But
oh
by
yeah.
two summers ago, you got the full dose.
So yeah, so I finally get the full dose first time in my life. I'm like, this is nuts. How do you guys deal with it? I go to some of my old friends, like, how did you guys put up with it? We didn't. Why did I skip? Why do you think I skip a lot of classes?
I have a question about when you were younger and dealing with this issue. You said you wrote that you fantasized about being with boys, but as a woman.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was so when puberty came and this is happening. Now, by the way, I've had every objection that anybody's ever had about the whole trans thing. And so I'm a teenager and this is happening. I'm like, what the heck? This is stupid. This is insane. What is my problem? And I'm just having a hard time. What do you think about yourself? And you this isn't going away. You can't, you know, you can't reason this away for some reason. And okay, fine. So whatever, and it was just how it worked. It was just the strangest thing. And, you know, you feel, there's not a lot of good emotions that come with having this incongruity. And like, why is it so persistent is the key question. When it comes to at least the classic case. Now I'm going to talk about the classic. When you hear me say classic transsexual, these are, this is a case where you've got the gender problem from your earliest memories and on. There is the recent phenomenon of rapid onset gender dysphoria. It's a real thing where suddenly in puberty, suddenly the kid, oh, now I've got gender dysphoria. And it's usually a natal female. And there's a whole issue to discuss, so we can return to it. But you know, in the classic case, it's just a very puzzling phenomenon.
Now, you grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? And
yeah.
so back then, acceptance of this condition was very low, I believe. I mean, I grew up in that era as well, and there weren't a whole lot of people who were tolerant of homosexuals and that sort of thing. So,
And then
uh,
AIDS, oh my God. Yeah.
so I'm wondering, like, if, let's say, like in sex ed, you had been taught about gay sex, do you think that would have altered your view and you would have gone towards being a gay man?
It's possible. Well, if I had normal levels of testosterone, because one of the things I noticed about myself is that when my hormone levels are low, generally, it's a lot easier to be bisexual. Okay. Not that I'm having a big reaction to anything, but when that testosterone was up, I was very focused on them. It's a very, again, there's something about testosterone which is clarifying. Whatever you're into, you're going to be into, as both of you, I'm sure, can appreciate. And so maybe if I had normal testosterone levels, I would have just been more focused on being a gay male. However, if I had normal testosterone levels and I didn't have the problems that I did, maybe I wouldn't have had a gender problem to begin with. Right. You start, when you start playing these what if games, you start, unraveling the onion layers. It's like, well, I didn't have
Yeah,
this
no,
problem.
you gotta imagine like what you would have done, and that's hard to
Yeah.
do
If I had
because
normal,
the context is the
let's say,
context is completely different.
yeah, let's say, because they didn't measure diddly, during the 70s, right? And let's say, I because and I would have epilepsy too. I had, it was relatively mild. I would have what's called absence seizures. They could be photosensitively triggered. Uh, but I was just a space cadet. I was just, oh, you're just daydreaming. Really? It was my daydream. I wasn't there for my daydream. I would have what I would call jackhammer jaw. I'd wake up, my everything would be bitten on the inside, cheeks and tongue and lips, and oh, you just got cold sores. It's like, really? Have you cold sores? Okay, you believe the doctor. If you're not thrashing on the floor, you don't have epilepsy. And I would have something called, which are fascinating, ecstatic seizures, which are, I can get to, but if you ever have them, they're the most pleasant, blissful experiences of your life. You just, they're usually described in spiritual terms. I'd love to talk about that when it comes to religion.
You've written about loving everyone, a kind of puppy dog syndrome that was associated with it. I'm curious about that.
That is, so the ecstatic seizures are the extreme case of this, and it's a thing where it's a seizure, or at least because you can have a seizure in one part of the brain, and your area of high activity can be somewhere else. And for some reason, like my locus for my seizures are deep, probably my hypothalamus, where the malformation is. But sometimes the higher activity level can be elsewhere. And when it hits the anterior insular cortex. Now, the insular cortex, if you peel the outer layer of the side of your brain out and get about 25% of the way in, you'll hit the insular cortex, which has a lot of forward and back circuits running through it. And the anterior is just before it hits the frontal lobe. And this is responsible for a lot of, there's emotional aspects to the interior, to the insular cortex. Also things like, control over blood pressure and other sort of homeostasis kind of things, similar to the hypothalamus. And it's sort of like your targeting mechanism. If you picture, always trying to target a moving target, like keep it in the scopes. And that's really a lot of what that part of the brain does is, but at a higher level.
The best in people?
Pardon?
Does it make you see the best in people?
Well, an interesting part of it is, I'll call it the emotion of confidence. Your confidence levels seem to be part of that insular cortex. How confident are you of what you know? And the reason this comes up because when that seizure comes up in the anterior forward part of it, you are really certain. And let me tell you, but I'll give you my experience and you'll see what I mean. So it seems to me to be like an echo of a seizure. My highest risk times for seizures are at night. So I woke up, the first time it happens, 11th grade. And I wake up and I'm feeling awesome. It's like, oh my God, this is the greatest day ever. and not only that, but I had this illusion like I was psychically connected to everyone on the planet and I knew where they were.
Sounds
were
like
you
a
all?
rave.
And I knew what you were thinking and I loved everybody. I felt, godlike in this omnipresence, omniscience, and this infinite capacity for love, the ultimate hippie trip. It was, and some people said, hey, it's like my experience I've had on DMT or something like that. But you are so confident that you of what you know. When people talk about these ecstatic seizures, they usually talk about it in spiritual terms. You can feel like you're God. You can be certain you're God. You or talk to God. And so if you're not critically thinking, now this is happening. I'm thinking, it's first happened in 11th grade. I'm Jesus Christ. Yes, Now I'm me being the critical thinker. It's part of my mind going, okay, this is really wrong. No, I'm really certain. Like two parts of my mind going on. I'm really certain that I'm Jesus Christ. No, you're not. This okay, I'm just going to sit back. I just mostly took it. I'm just going to enjoy the show. After a little bit of back and forth in my head about this certainty, I'm going, I might be certain, but this is kind of dumb. I won't, this will wear off, but let's just enjoy the show. I went to school and I would get picked on a lot. And I see the people who bully, not who didn't, right? But I get picked on more than a lot of other people. And I'd see the bullies and people who didn't like me. I wanted so bad to go, I love you. Of course, that'd be weird, right? And even more beating would commence. That wouldn't work out. But I wanted to. It just felt, and this happened again. It would happen a couple other times. But this anterior part of the insular cortex, where it connects up to the frontal lobe, and it's also connected to your amygdala. And in this little network are things called mirror neurons, the things which get excited when you consider the inner mental state of someone else. And so when and people during surgeries, if a neurosurgeon goes in and electrically stimulates the anterior insular cortex, you get the same results. Oh my God, this is an awesome feeling. Turning electric power off. Oh God, disappeared suddenly, but they can feel so certain. People who study this, it's like, you just feel so certain about whatever you're thinking. And, this gives us some hints, and epilepsy's always been this great lens into how the brain works. And this gives us some insight as to, how that part of the brain can, helps us, I don't know, be confident about what we're thinking and that kind of thing. It also turns out that it's interestingly enough, that it's sensitive to testosterone. And one of the things which I've seen in, either female and male transitioners, and especially detransitioners, and I ask people, like, what was the things that you liked about testosterone? And they would talk about the feeling of confidence and certainty in the world. It's like, and it was, you know, knowing what they were doing, whether they did or not, but the feeling
Right.
was,
If being driven is part of
yeah.
it.
And many of these sort of over testosterone guys who like more testosterone than brains, absolutely certain about whatever it was that they were doing, and it wasn't such a good idea anyway. I'm absolutely certain. Wile E. Coyote, problem.
Well, in some instances, I think being able to make choices quickly and be certain of your choice is important to survival. I think
Yes.
you probably trace this back to just primitive man and the roles that man would play versus the woman. As the hunter, you have to go out into some wild areas, right, and take down a beast to bring food back for your family. So you have to be able to make choices in that regard. And to some extent, and even in modern society, I think that is the case, where especially if the man is the breadwinner. But then you notice that in a lot of families where the woman is the breadwinner, she'll be very confident and make
Yeah.
choices.
Right. All this hormonal stuff, and hormonal production, sensitivities, conversions, this all happens on a bell curve, right? And there's some women who have more testosterone than or they can be more sensitive to the testosterone they do have, or especially in the brain. They don't have to be more sensitive to testosterone everywhere. They can just be more, for whatever genetic reason we haven't found out yet. Let's say their testosterone receptors are more keen in their insular cortex, you know and so what happens, not all a woman's testosterone is aromatase away into estrogen, and some of it's free floating, and some is going to hit the brain, and some is going to hit the insular cortex, and we all need both testosterone and estrogen. And of course, 5% of our testosterone comes from our adrenal glands, so it is there in present in everyone. And if your insular cortex is more sensitive to it as a woman, you're going to feel it. You're good. And there's other parts of the brain which are important for sexual stimulation and focus and that kind of thing. And we know women exist on that spectrum too. Where some women are very sexually focused, and some require a lot more work. And it's about whining and dining. It's a relationship, and that's where I fell. So yes, you are right. And now some people might work for it. It's like, I want that confidence. I'm going to build it. I'm going to make a conscious decision to, adopt proper philosophies and that kind of thing. There's a number of ways that human beings, given the amazingly adaptive systems we are, can get to this route. But of course, the biological route is much easier, right? It just happens. And of course, with men in particular, we have to watch for the Wile E. Coyote problem. But we've seen it in some women too. You were so certain of that, weren't you?
That's funny. In our remaining time, I at least wanted to switch gears a little bit, slightly more lighthearted to I notice you're also a Beatles and Star Trek fan, which in addition to Ayn Rand, I that's good. So do you see like kind of a connection between the Beatles and Star Trek and Ayn Rand?
No, I mean, so William, you said we're probably the same age, roughly. And Star Trek was the sort of fandom was sort of the ascendancy at the time. And so it was a thing for me. So what happened? I mean, it was interesting to watch. And my mother, for one Christmas, bought me both they just come out, the Franz Joseph Star Trek technical manual and the Enterprise blueprints. And I found them fascinating. So it's kind of cool. And I was fascinated with, like, how would one build these things? How would these things work? I love how things work. I ended up with an undergrad degree in physics, and I was, looking at a number of things in graduate work, but I had to pull back. My husband was sick and whatever. And so that motivated me to do, that technical manual was very motivating for me. They gave me a little hint on relativity. So, okay, I cracked open the encyclopedias. I went to the library. I started learning in junior high school. I started learning, relativity. I was even starting to study some of the math and that kind of thing. I was that precocious kid. And there was the schematics for a tricorder. It's like, I'm going to build this. And it was a digital clock. A digital clock working. And all these different things, and it just took me down these rabbit holes of physics and then of course the blueprints took me down ultimately rat holes rabbit holes of graphic arts and film production and I was just interested in everything, and it was just sort of an anchor for me, and it's just motivating to learn about all these things. So was I as much of a Star Trek fan as much as I was about the possibility of what the future could look like, what's possible that the humans could build and do, and that was important to me. And I for a while I was going to be a science fiction writer when I was young. I also had something called hypergraphia. I would write, I could write impulsively and draw impulsively. And my mother was come high school, she was a secretary in a high school. I had a study hall. And she goes, "You don't have a study hall anymore." What? I switched it for a class, a drawing class. And what did you do? If you don't like it, take you out. And it was a mechanical drafting class. It was all guys. And for me, that was kind of intimidating. But I enjoyed the whole, it was back when T-squares and pencils and that kind of thing. No CAD. But it was just such a Zen thing to do. And I loved it. And I loved graphic arts in general. And I just loved doing that whole mechanical drafting thing. And part of that was because she saw that, just a year prior, that whole enterprise blueprint thing. And like, how would you build such a thing? What would such a craft look like? How would you, and you just start thinking about the logistics of it all. And it was just fascinating to consider.
I think with the character of Spock, Star Trek took on, a more science-oriented approach because he was all about logic and reason and all that.
And Roddenberry wanted that. He wanted the science in there.
I read Roddenberry modeled Spock somewhat after Galt.
No way, really?
Yeah.
I know he got especially for the first pilot, The Cage, which became the 2-part menagerie episode.
Sure.
That was modeled off of, he was just fascinated with Forbidden Planet. And if you ever see Forbidden Planet and you watch The Cage, it's like, oh, okay, kind of different spin on the old Forbidden Planet movie. All right, But he wanted more science in it and that kind of thing. And I mean, I don't know about the Spock character, but I know he didn't want it to be as corny. But he was still very much inspired by Forbidden Planet. But just wanted to make it better somehow. And I know that. I also, for a while, I was friends with David Gerrold, who was a writer on Star Trek. Gay man. He wrote Trouble with Tribbles and a few other things. And he actually had, a script for 2 gay guys, and he brought it to Gene. We got to do this. Gene wasn't against it. He just felt that, well, at some point it was weird. There won't be gay guys in the future. What do you mean? We'll solve that problem. Which kind of disappointed David Gerrold, but part of his script ended up in the episode where Balance of Terror, where they were fighting the Romulans for the first time, and it starts with this wedding, and the ending is where the husband, who was, they didn't quite get the wedding together when the red alert came. At the end, the husband had died in the attack, and the bride was left.
Right, of course.
It was supposed to be two gay guys. And, and so when, so yeah, it was things like that. It was kind of interesting, but, there's things, it was interesting just given what he thought about the future, what he's trying to do. It'd be fascinating if Spock was based on Galt, but Spock, unfortunately, it wouldn't be very much based on Galt, would it? Because he didn't run. He wasn't trying to build a different. He wasn't going Galt on the
Not
university.
completely. I think the logic and maybe even the emotional struggles. He was half human.
He was half human. I mean, it was a fascinating thing to do. The character, worked for us all. I mean, when I was going through my emotional struggles, I wish I could shut down my emotions like Spock. I was like, I wish I could shut it down. Anyway, I can just, give myself a lobotomy or something.
You must believe the bullets aren't real. Like in that,
Matrix. Oh, well done, that Matrix. Oh, golly.
William, any final questions?
Do we want to talk about women's sports?
Okay, yeah, we can touch on that.
Go.
Yeah, so I just have I think a somewhat unique perspective on it. I don't think that allowing so-called trans women into sports is about the strength, really. I don't think that's the main problem with it, like them overwhelming actual women. I think the problem is that women's sports as a category should be for women. And it's just a fact that trans women aren't women. And so what people set up women's sports to be, the purpose of it is to see who the best women are. That's my opinion. And I think because we recognize that in many sports, especially ones where physical strength is critical, women aren't generally as strong as men. So you get the phenomenon where if you allow trans women into women's sports, they're going to overpower.
So it is about the overpowering.
No, but so for me, it's really about, we've just set up this category of sports for women because we recognize that in most sports, not all. For example, we had that ice skater.
The contentious part is whether or not trans women are women. I mean, you're probably going to get the show pulled for that too.
But what I'm trying to say is that not all women's sports are about strength. Some of it is about the femininity, the grace, like in figure skating or in gymnastics. And I don't think
men who are that,
what was that?
Don't tell men who are figure skating that it's all about women.
No, yeah, that's true. I mean, for women's figure skating, I think it's about beauty and grace and all that. And men, it's about doing backflips and things like that. They do like a bunch of flips.
And there are some physically, even for women's gymnastics or skating, I mean, there is a physical element.
But anyway, what do you think about the idea that the purpose of women's sports is to find the best women? And by that, I mean the biological women.
Well, here's a little dirty secret, especially when it comes to strength. You end up selecting, in professional sports, you end up selecting for women with, who are either more sensitive to testosterone, or who have, hey, you get the woman who had, some degree of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. You want them on your team, because, well, whatever, especially if it's strength based, And this was an issue recently. I forget where it was and who was the name and everything, but they wanted to pull her out because she was just overpowering everybody. It turns out, she, got a congenital, adrenal
runner, I think.
It didn't affect her gender identity as far as I know, but she was certainly competing and just besting everybody. And so the question is, well, is this fair? The concept of fairness comes up. So I mean, yeah, there's always going to be gray issues, especially when it comes to money and professional sports, and who do you take advantage of and who do you not? Any man, by the way, who's, got less testosterone and more estrogen, who's got hormonal problems, is not going to be in any man's sport. It's just not going to happen unless it's something they can participate in.
Right.
You know,
Well,
already,
nature isn't fair. Nature doesn't create everybody equal.
nature's not fair. Sorry, boo hoo hoo. And that's the other thing about, when you're trans, is that if you can't accept that life is just unfair, like if you're blind, like, it sucks, but you do the best you can. You adapt the best you can. If you cannot accept this, you are in for a whole world of hurt. I'm sorry, child, but you know, if you're trying to, bend the whole world to your will so that you cannot feel the pain of unfairness, you're still going to be disappointed because the world is not going to bend to your will. And as many, fits and, that you pitch, it's not going to happen. Sorry.
Hmm.
You know, sorry, rabbit tricks are for kids.
And
So,
that's all sorts of groups. I mean, Greta Thunberg on the
mm,
environment, or yeah, you just have to realize that we're not going to reshape society. I've got it, issues too, with people, but no one's, they haven't gotten to the things people make fun about me about yet.
We'll
you
get
know,
there.
it stinks, but what are you going to do? Life is unfair. And then at some point, the most unfair thing of all is going to happen, and you're going to die for good. You know,
Yeah.
that's how it is. And if you cannot accept this, if you can't live life and enjoy every minute and understand what that means to live for yourself today at this moment, you're always going to be disappointed. And that's one of the things that I liked about objectivist philosophy and objectivists is this focus on my life today, enjoyment. What
Yeah.
that means,
The one
you
life we
know,
got.
yeah, the life we have. And man, that has been so important to me through this whole thing. Because it's like I was never going to be able to have kids. One of my first disappointments when I was really young, innocently not thinking not much about it. I just had this default assumption when I was really really young that I was going to grow to be a woman and wife and mother. Didn't think anything of it until I started voicing these things. And at some point, I asked my mother, "Okay, mom, what's it going to be like when I have a baby?" She knew exactly what I meant. And so then the talk came, and I just remember feeling intensely disappointed. It's like, what do you mean? I'm I don't know, 4 or something, maybe I don't know. And I was just told I was never going to have kids. That's how I saw it. It just sort of stuck with me. And that's unfair. I could wallow, and even now, just never having kids and that kind of thing. It still hurts. I could let it consume me, or get on with life. Life's unfair. It
Yeah.
sucks sometimes, but there
And
are
it's going to
things.
move forward either way.
Yeah, you still have to move forward. There are many things to enjoy your life. You have to understand perspective. You have to understand where your emotions get it. Get the best of you. Distort your realities. Again, especially the whole gender thing. And how is my reality being distorted? I mean, I spent just so much time in my life trying to wrestle with that, and so you get used to wrestling with that and other things. Oh, I never had kids. And boo hoo hoo. How is this distorting my reality and my enjoyment of today? Okay, it probably is. So how do I deal with it? How do I wrestle that to the ground and learn to enjoy my life today? And I found objectivist discussions very helpful in that regard. Is it a trick? I mean, does it really solve anything? It doesn't really solve any problems, but like a lot of things, epistemology is a good set of tools. Good epistemology is a good set of tools for structuring your thoughts, for you know you know for understanding. It's not a substitute for a good psychology, for good brain chemistry or whatever, but darn, it's a good set of tools, and these have been honed over generations. Pay attention to good epistemology and work with these tools. And when you go to a psychiatrist or something, counselors and that kind of thing, you know they give you, it's a bag of tricks, a bag of tools. Well, let's try this, maybe this will help you. And we use these things all the time. Just good tools, good tricks, but if they work, roll with it, because life is too short, and, get it to work, enjoy your life.
That's
Because, in that second seizure that I had, that I woke up in the hospital in 2017, my heart probably stopped. I got diagnosed with neurocardiogenic syncope related to the epilepsy, which again tries to stop my heart and will. And my heart probably did stop, and thankfully it came up again. But so this is the first time I'm feeling blood rushing out of my brain and oxygen, and I'm dying, not literally. And I didn't know what was happening. I think I'm having a stroke, and this is it. Goodbye, everybody. And so I had these few moments of, of where I'm thinking about my life, and you, in this moment of clarity, what has been important this whole time, the people you love, that you've enjoyed life, and even the bad parts were good because they were moments of life. And at that very moment when you're losing your life, do you realize that, oh, even the bad parts were good because I was alive. I was, the miracle of life, and the fact that it was my life, and enjoy every damn minute of it, because one day you're going to be like that, and you're going to be dying going, oh, gee, all that was nice. It's gone now.
that's
And there's no more of it, even the bad moments, but they were all life,
powerful stuff. It's great perspective. I want to thank you so much for doing this. I'd like to bring you back, maybe just where we're talking about political issues or even
Yeah.
epistemological issues, something that's less direct on the trans thing, but it's really great. It's good getting your perspective. I am going to save a copy of this because I do expect YouTube to put it down, but we'll see how it goes. We'll post it in a few hours. William, any final thoughts?
Just thank you very much for coming on the show, Bill, and
You're welcome.
I look forward to discussing politics or some other issues with you.
I tell you that, doing the trans dance, it teaches you a lot about people and yourself, and in some respects I feel kind of fortunate because I've had just perspectives that most people just do not get. So there's, and with other trans people we talk about, like, well, there is that we get to learn these things that other people don't. So yeah, especially if it's, and by the way, friend of mine, Claire Ray Randall, wrote a book on war and gender, and she's one of these normal trans people who tried to, it's like, I want to come out, I gotta say something because all the insanity out there, and so she's one of those people who, like, this gives you a unique perspective on things. Let me try talking about it. So yeah, if there's anything I could do, think in the same spirit, I'd be glad to.
That's great. That's we appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.